beautiful day to be in the Lord's house. And we're glad to have quite a few visitors with us today. It's good to have the House of Breeze with us, and especially some of them that I used to get to see nearly every week and haven't gotten to see for quite some time. And so it's good to see you guys again, all of you. Are you tired of politics? Isn't it the case? We get to watch politicians an awful lot on TV, and some of them are talking about how bad the world is, and they're the ones whose side lost. And we hear the other side talk about how great it is right now. They're in power and everything's going well, and so the world's great, and they go back and forth. The democratic process itself is a privilege, and it is the best system. I really believe that we can hope for in terms of governing a country. But the success of the democratic system is our responsibility, isn't it? And I get tired of the process sometimes, though, and of hearing the back and forth that goes on in politics. The story's told of a lame duck president. He was running for another term and he lost. And the new president was getting his tour of the White House that he was going to be taking over, and the lame duck was taking him through and showing him the ins and the outs in the Oval Office and so forth. And he finally said, he says, I've got something for you. And he gave the new incumbent, the new guy coming in, 3 envelopes. And he said, they're numbered, 1, 2, 3. And he says, you open those in order, when you get a crisis. When a crisis comes, open the envelope. Well, the new president went through the honeymoon stage for about 6 months, and everything was going fine. And then towards the end of that first year, there was a crisis. There was an economic downturn that was creating a lot of concern. And so he opened the first envelope, and inside it was just a card that simply said, "Blame me." And so he did. He began to blame the previous administration for their problems, and this was all the consequences of their bad decisions and leadership, and we're suffering those consequences. And so he blamed the former president. They got through the crisis okay. And then it went along for a while, and then towards the end of the second year of his term, they went into another crisis. There was some domestic issues going on that people were bickering about, and it got kind of ugly. And so he opened the second envelope, and it had a card that simply said, "Blame my party." And so he did. He said, all this stuff that we're suffering now domestically is because of the policies of the other party, and we're just suffering their consequences, and on and on. And that finally got through that okay, and everything smoothed out. And then he, towards the end of his third year, there was a foreign relationship problem with another country, and there was some bickering going on and some tensions between the countries, and there was a lot of dissatisfaction with his administration because of the way they were handling their relationships. And so he opened the third letter, and it simply said, "Prepare 3 envelopes." In Jesus' day, there was also 2 political parties controlling much of that culture as well. They didn't always get along very well either. Even though the Romans controlled the land of Judea and the Holy Land, as we call it, the Jews themselves were still being ruled by what they called a theocracy. The Jews were ruled by God, and specifically by religion. They weren't really ruled by the Romans as much as by their religion. And the Jewish faith was divided in, at that time, 2 parties. The Pharisees and the Sadducees. Very similar to the Republicans and Democrat parties today in some ways. Just the idea of there being two two warring factions sometimes. And as Jesus was traveling, we're going through a series here this summer on spending the summer with the Savior by the seashore. And things that happen around the Sea of Galilee. And this is one of those occasions. Matthew 15, verse 19, and in chapter 16, he talks to them about these two groups that are kind of controlling the faith of the day. In chapter 15, verse 19, he says, and they had just had the second feeding of the multitude, the feeding of 4,000 at this time, the second major miracle that he had conducted. And then that had just concluded. It says, after Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into a boat and he went into the city Magadan. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, when evening comes, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for miraculous signs. None will be given except the sign of Jonah. Jesus left them and went away. When they went across the lake, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They discussed this among themselves and said, it's because we didn't bring any bread. They were trying to figure out what he meant. Aware of their discussion, Jesus says, oh, ye of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? I mean, they just seen him feed 5,000, then see him feed 4,000. Why are they worried about not having any bread? He can take care of the 12. Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets full were gathered? And the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls were gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. As Jesus was traveling across the Sea of Galilee with his apostles, he warned them about these two political groups and the influence that the culture can have. And they have to be aware of the influence of that culture. And there's a reason that we have that teaching in our scriptures. There's a reason the Holy Spirit inspired the writers to include this one, because we have to know this same truth. We have to be aware of the same concern of the influence of our culture on us. You see, there were two influencers. There were the Pharisees. They were the conservatives. You might even say they were the ultra-conservatives. They believed in the keeping of the letter of the law. They defined what was and wasn't work on the Sabbath. In other words, that was what they spent their time doing. What does it mean? You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. Okay, how many sticks can you pick up on the Sabbath before it becomes work? How many steps can you walk on the Sabbath before it becomes work? They began to get into the nitpicky parts of it, of the law. And Jesus was often in conflict with the Pharisees because of this attitude, because they were such legalists. You can go over back to the 12th chapter of Matthew, verses 1 and 2. It says, at that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Drop down to verse 9. Going on from that place, he went to the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there looking for a reason. A man with a withered hand was there, looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They asked him, he's talking about the Pharisees again, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? He said to them, if any of you had a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. He was in constant conflict because of their ultra-legalism. They condemned him for letting his apostles nibble on a few heads of grain as they walked through a field. They condemned him and sought to kill him because he healed a man on the Sabbath. You see, the Pharisees saw the spiritual only in terms of the outward rituals, the outward purity that somebody might be able to show. Legalism and ritualism were the words to describe their attitudes. They paid little attention to the point or the intention of the laws. They were so wrapped up in the keeping of the letter of the law that they missed the point. To them, it didn't matter what kind of a person you were. It only mattered if you kept the letter of the law. Ritualism. In fact, they could divide a person into two parts. The heart and the mind, and the outer body. And it didn't matter what was going on in the heart or mind. They were only concerned about what was going on in the body. What the body was doing all the little things of the law. You could be hateful, you could be vindictive, you could be lustful, you could be angry, you could be jealous, you could be just a mean person on the inside. But as long as you kept the letter of the law, then you were okay. That's legalism. They didn't get the point. And Jesus clashed with them constantly. In the 23rd chapter of Matthew, verses 23 and following, he says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He didn't pull any punches. You give a tenth of your spices, your mint, your dill, your cumin. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. In other words, they tithed everything, even to the spices in their cabinets at home, in the kitchen. And yet the big issues, like justice, mercy, and faith, they didn't pay attention to that. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain at a gnat but swallow a camel. He says, you don't get the point. You worry about all the little nitty-gritty stuff, but you miss the point. Jesus said, the heart of a person is more important. And when it is right with God, the body will follow. Go over, back just a little bit, the 22nd chapter, verse 37 and following. Chapter 22, verse 37 and following. Let's go back to 34 because it paints the background of the picture. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. Now, they had a question. They were going to question. They were always trying to trip him up. And so they said, one of them, an expert in the law, the letter of the law, an expert in the letter of the law, tested him with this one. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment? Now, you know that's going to cause a problem, isn't it? Because they're all going to have a different view of which is the most important commandment. They're trying to trip him up, bring up opposition against him. Jesus is smarter than they were. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Love God. Love your fellow man. He said that when the heart is right with God, the speech and the actions will follow. Go over to Luke, the 6th chapter. He kept trying to drill this into them. Luke chapter 6, verse 43 through 45. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. The good man brings forth good things out of the good stored up in his heart. And the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For out of the overflow of the heart, his mouth speaks. And Jesus was concerned about what was in us, our hearts. Purifying our hearts. The lifestyle will follow. They were so interested only in the actions that they forgot about where it comes from. The Pharisees were legalists, ritualists. They were only concerned about that you went the right place on the right day and did the right thing, and not about whether you had the right heart. And so he was constantly in conflict with them. But the other group was there as well, the Sadducees. You see, the Sadducees were the liberals of the day. They didn't take the law literally. They went to the opposite end of the spectrum from the Pharisees. In fact, there was a lot of things they didn't believe. They didn't believe in the afterlife. They didn't believe in a resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in heaven or hell. Life, as far as they were concerned, was all here and now. This was all there is, the here and now. So grab all the gusto you can, because this is it. This is all of life. The Sadducees tended to be of the wealthy aristocracy. They had much. Most of the Sadducees were the upper crust. They had much. And they had fallen too much in love with this world. This life is all that counts. And things spiritual were not as important as things material. They were the materialists of their day. They saw all of God's blessings in physical ways. If a man was rich and he was healthy, then obviously he must be righteous and good, because God rewards. If a man was ill, if a man was crippled or blind, it was because he'd sinned. Everything keyed in on the physical as being the indication of good or bad. They were the materials of the day. All of God's blessings were as things physical. The kingdom was a physical kingdom. They saw all of life as just the physical. The rich young ruler in Matthew the 19th chapter, Matthew chapter 19, the rich young ruler was doubtless a Sadducee. In chapter 19, verses 16 and following. Now a man came up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus said. "There's only one who is good. And if you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" the man required. Jesus says, "Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, love your neighbor as yourself." 6 of the 10 commandments. Remember which 6 he gave. "All these I have kept since I was a young man. What do I lack? He knew he was missing something. And Jesus said, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. And Jesus said to his disciples, I tell you the truth, it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. This man was a Sadducee, and he saw everything in terms of the physical. And his faith was in the physical. Oh, he'd handled the last 6 of the commandments. Did you notice that? See, the commandments are divided into 2 groups. The first 4 have to do with relationship with God. The last 6 with relationship with people. He had handled that because everything to the Sadducees was on this level. But when it came to having faith in God, and Jesus pointed it out by putting him to the test, give up your wealth and trust in God. He said, I can't do it. His whole faith was in things physical and in this level, not this. Sadducees had fallen too in love with this world. They could not see beyond the physical, beyond this world. Things spiritual were not as important to them. They were the materialists of their day. Now, this is in here, this parable, or this teaching of Jesus in the boat in the Sea of Galilee, is in here for us because we deal with the same thing in our culture as well. We have cultural influences around us that we have to guard against. Just as Jesus told them, be careful of their influence. The same teachings exist today, too, that he's concerned about, that he was warning his disciples about. He was telling them not to come under the influence of the dominant cultural mindsets of their day. And we have to be very concerned about the same thing. Paul translated his teaching very well. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, he says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't let the world form your attitudes and your way of thinking. Beware of conforming to the pattern of this world. That's exactly what Jesus was saying. Watch out for the Pharisees and the Sadducees because they're teaching you attitudes that are wrong. He said, don't relegate the faith to rituals like the Pharisees. Don't begin to think as long as you keep certain things, as you come to the right place on the right day and you do the right thing, that everything is okay. That it doesn't matter what's going on in your heart. Don't believe that way. I've seen this in ministry. Several years ago, our congregation back in Morris built a larger worship center. And it was a very attractive worship center. And right after that, we got a lot of requests about doing weddings. Because it's such a beautiful worship center to have a wedding in. And we got inundated with requests. And so we instituted some policies and so forth. And we required counseling beforehand. We didn't want to become a wedding chapel. We required counseling. We required them to be involved in attending the church and so forth. And so we would find them, they'd come in and they'd go through the counseling. They would come and they would attend. They wanted that wedding in that church building. And then after the wedding, we didn't see them anymore. They didn't come back. They kind of just went through what they had to do to have that ritual, as though I could pronounce on that relationship some kind of a magic pronouncement that would ensure their happiness forever. And they would come, have their wedding, and they would not come back again. That's meaningless ritualism. At that point, A wedding in a church building is just a meaningless ritual if there's not something else going on. Some today insist on the babies being sprinkled. And we saw a lot of that in other churches. We didn't practice it. But people would insist on it. I've had even relatives that insisted their babies were sprinkled, but they never brought them back to church. They never raised them to know God. They never raised them in Sunday school. Just so long as they were sprinkled when they were born. That was all meaningless ritualism. Some think that they can come to church on Christmas and Easter, and as long as they come on those days, and they're too busy the other 50 weeks of the year to come and worship God. But as long as they're there on Christmas and Easter, they've taken care of it. Meaningless ritualism. There is so much of it out there in Christendom today. The majority of our people in the United States consider themselves Christians. But they sure aren't in church on Sunday. They're not devoted to God in any other way. That's meaningless ritualism. And it affects the culture that we live in. And we have to be aware of that we don't get wrapped up in culturalism, in ritualism, where we forget that it's in here. It's changing of the heart, changing of the mind, committing yourselves on the inside to Him that makes the difference. Jesus warned us to avoid this ritualism that does not affect the heart. He looks on the heart and the relationship we have with God that comes from the heart. Don't come under the influence of our culture. You know what is happening today? Again, regular attendance in church. You know what the definition of that today is? Anywhere from once or even twice a month. If you attend church once a month, you're really good. If you attend it twice a month, you are a religious person. You punch the clock. God wants to have our love. He wants our hearts. He doesn't just want us to show up once in a while. He wants our minds to be here. He wants our hearts to be here. He wants us to be here because we want to be here and praising Him and worshiping Him. Not because we're trying to check off something in a checklist, spirituality. Don't relegate your faith to meaningless ritualism, because that's what the Pharisees did. Don't fall under the materialistic influence of our age like the Sadducees did. We live in a very materialistic world. We are very much tempted to live for the here and now above the eternal future. Keep priorities in balance. It's difficult in this particular world. This one really affects us because we have so much materialism in our culture. Materialism drives us. I was raised by parents who came out of the Great Depression. And they really suffered during the Great Depression. And they taught us work hard and accumulate, save. Those two things were really important. You worked hard and you saved what you earned. I've been known to be a little bit tight. People from First Christian know that, don't they? And it's that I was taught. And it can become a principle of life that takes over. And there are better principles than that. That's a good one. I don't deny it, but don't take it to be your governing principle of life. In Matthew 6:33, the Lord said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." He didn't say we had to take a vow of poverty. And only one man did He ever ask, "Sell all you have and come and follow me." That was the young Sadducee, because he's trying to prove a point. He never asked that again of anybody. He said, don't make these things the goals of your life. He says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. And these things will be added. They'll come in their place, but make sure you know what's first and primary. What's the first importance. It's the spiritual. It's the relationship with Him. The physical is not the sign of whether you're religious. A lot of people think, man, all of God's blessings come in physical ways. If I'm a real spiritual person, I'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise. There's a philosophy out there in the religious world today, and you can see it on TV, that if you want to be a healthy, wealthy, you come to God and He'll make you that. No, that's not the sign of spirituality, of having money and being important. Believe in heaven and lay up treasures there. These things will come along that you need. But make sure the priority comes from our relationship with the Father. I work part-time for a funeral home in Morris. I've driven the hearse a lot of times to the cemetery. I've never once been asked to hook up a trailer behind it. We've never taken anything out there to bury with the coffin. You don't take it with you. You don't take it with you. I know what they look like in those coffins. I see them before we put the lid down. Most often they take the rings and some jewelry and stuff off to give to the family. You don't take anything with you. And yet we live our lives trying to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, as though that the person who has the most stuff when you die wins the game. Is that what we believe? We don't take it with us. Why spend your life accumulating something that you're going to leave behind? I don't care how much you love your family, want to leave it behind for them, but we live our lives as though we're keeping score by bank accounts. That's the Sadducees. They saw everything as being about this level, nothing about that. And that's what he says. Beware the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Watch out for the influences of the culture around you. And he gives us the same warning. Make sure Christ, not culture, is influencing you. Make sure faith affects your heart and your whole being, not just your superficial ritualism. Don't fall in love with things that you'll have to leave behind. We should be, as Christians, we should be trendsetters, pace setters, not culture followers. The church, one of the things that bothers me, the church follows culture so much. We're supposed to lead culture. We're supposed to so live that people can see a difference and say, hey, that works better. We're not supposed to blend in. There's been a real push, I'm afraid, that in order to win people, you've got to become like them. Now, we've got to walk a tightrope there. We've got to keep a relationship with them. We've got to build a relationship with the lost. We don't have to become just like them. We can show them the difference. We cannot become the Sadducees and Pharisees of our culture. Follow them. Follow the Lord. We're different. It's about what's in our heart and mind, not what we do ritualistically. It's about things that are spiritual, not the things that are physical, that measure how good we are. And Jesus was warning them about what they were going to have to deal with, and it hasn't changed much over 2,000 years. We still have the same cultural influences that we have to work against. It all comes from in here and in here. Inner person, being in love with God. Love God. All your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your fellow man. That's what it's all about. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you have, through your Son, instructed us and shown us the truth. We get off base sometimes. We get distracted. Constantly the advertisers tell us we need, we want. We understand that this world is not my home. We understand we're just passing through here. We understand that our blessings are laid up with you. Help us, Heavenly Father, to remember that. To remember you are the Father, the Creator, the Sustainer of life. Our relationship with you is more important than everything else. Help us to so live that you see that and others see that. And they recognize a peace that comes to those who truly trust you. The world will seek it out if they see it in us. Help us, Heavenly Father, to be aware of the culture that we live in. Not to succumb to it. To rise above it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. The invitation is always, first of all, through Jesus Christ.